Good morning. We are so pleased to be inviting you to share this webinar today with us. It is our 114th month in a row. We're in our 10th year of delivering these free webinars to a national audience that is as broad as about 80,000 people. We're grateful for those that are attending live. We're also grateful for those of you that are watching it as enduring content. I'm Charles Denham. I'm on slide 2, chairman of TMIT, and I'll be your MC today. A couple of housekeeping details quickly. The first one is to make sure the volume is totally at the maximal level for your speakers and for your computer. So your WebEx volume needs to be at maxed, computer volume maxed, and external speaker maxed. For those attending the live webinar, if you're still having audio difficulty, click on the participants icon at the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and then click on the lower left-hand icon of a telephone, and we'll help you with a land-based line. I'm on slide 5 for those that have the slides, and for those that don't, please go to www.safetyleaders.org. In the upper right-hand field of the landing page, click on Upcoming Events, and then click on today's webinar, Drug Shortages, a Critical Patient Safety Issue. For those of you that are coming on as enduring content participants on demand, we'll be posting additional resources on the same page, and that is slide 6 for those that have the slides today. Slide 7 just addresses our Twitter and Facebook addresses, and on slide 8 is our purpose statement. And we will measure our success by how we protect and enrich the lives of families, patients, and caregivers. Our mission is to accelerate performance solutions that save lives, save money, and create value in the communities that we serve. Our disclosure statement is on slide 9. No product, service, or technology will be shared by anyone who has any financial relationship, and these webinars are funded by personal philanthropy and with no money directly or indirectly coming from industry. Our speakers and reactors are on slide 10, and I'll introduce them as they speak, but Dr. Gregory Botz from MD Anderson Cancer Center, who has faculty appointments both with the University of Texas and Stanford. Adriana Rivera, a PharmD from MD Anderson, who will be leading the way on this topical area. Arlene Salamandra, who always makes me smile because she's been one of our patient advocates for, I think, north of 10 years, and will be introducing our focus to keep us focused on patients and families. Grace Magadman, who is a PharmD and a real hero of the story of today's webinar, who helped find the last chemo dose for Brooke Bezikoff, whose mom will be speaking, and a picture of Sarah and Brooke are at the bottom page, and then mine is at the lower right-hand corner. So we always start our webinars with the voice of the patient and family. Arlene Salamandra is a real champion for patient safety, and if anyone knew how many sort of rescue efforts that she's undertaken for patients and families, even in the last 2 weeks, they would be amazed. Arlene is a multi-gifted person with great skills in art. She was a caregiver in extended care. She's been a national speaker. She's been a national author and co-author with us on the National Quality Forum Safe Practices. I engaged she in a group that meet every other Saturday and work with us. And she was also one of the co-authors of a program for that helped get the HACs, the hospital-acquired conditions, through the CMS. And so a real patient safety advocate. Arlene, would you lead us off and get us to focus on the right things today?
Okay, thank you, Chuck, and thank you for that intro. I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to be on the webinar today. And, I want to thank you, Chuck, again, for always including a patient's voice in your projects. Patient voice before and after has been something that you've always done, and we appreciate it. Because patients have a different way of thinking, and we could play a vital role in the improvement of care. So it's my hope that all facilities will embrace the patient engagement in their patient safety programs. So thank you again, and I'm really looking forward to the subject today and from hearing from the speakers. I think we'll all be learning something, so thank you.
And thanks, Arlene, for always being there for anyone in need. So I am going to be very, very brisk going through a set of slides so that we can get to our speakers right away. However, we wanted to address some of the latest information that you may want to pull for your teams. CDC just put out their report on opioid overdose. Now, we hear this in the news all the time. This is a great source of truth for you, and the curves, I think, are most important and staggering. I won't read the slides because I want to get to our speakers, but I'll go through a series, and this is on a 2 or 3 page report that just came out by CDC. It's dated December 2017. However, when you look at the highest rates of overdose, they're in the ages of 25 to 54. And as we get to the issue of fentanyl and carfentanil, Dr. Botz, we'd love to have you speak up. 2016, 22 states, the OD death rates were statistically higher. You'll see the states that were high and the states that were low, but all states are rising, which is really, really a tough issue. Probably the most important thing to take away from this really brisk review of the slides are the synthetic opioids and this issue of fentanyl analogs, tramadol, just enormous. And you'll see a news slide that you can use in your presentations regarding this issue. I would say the CDC is a really good source of truth. Here in California, where I am, the fentanyl is showing up in cocaine and meth, and so we're seeing this continued influx of these synthetic opioids, which are very, very dangerous and causing terrific ODs. Here in California, you can see, and this was the Los Angeles Times, May 15th. This was this week that this article came out, and you can see the enormous jump of fentanyl deaths in California. So we really want to help you make sure to have that on your radar, and especially update your folks on this risk and the fact that it's being mixed with other drugs, not just heroin. Second topic is the MedTech program, which we launched over the last 2.5 years, and it was really kind of a wonderful brainchild that came from a conversation with Dr. Botz, who's one of our speakers today, about active shooter events. However, it led us to work with a fellow named Michael Dorn, who's done more of the active shooter evaluations across the country than anyone, who said, listen, there are a lot more deaths from other things like sudden cardiac arrest. And as we were pulling some of the content for an international meeting and international manual, we found that even in our hotels, bystander care is happening, and it's critical that we keep drawing attention to pre-hospital care. This is a story, and I won't go into it, regarding a risk management leader in Dana Point that saved a man's life with the AED, and they had done the risk management evaluations. And this Laguna Cliffs Marriott is about 5 minutes from where I am today, and so heroes at the front line in bystander care, and we really see in the opioid overdose issue absolutely critical. So I won't read these slides so that we can get right to our speakers, but really, really critical. Those of you that are doing work in the area of nursing, I'd like to draw your attention to an infographic that was just released last week by now it's the National Academy of Medicine, but it references the IOM report on the future of nursing. And the series of 5 slides here, again, I won't go through. These would be excellent slides for you in your nursing education programs to draw the attention to where our nurses are, where they're working, and what they're aspiring to accomplish. And so it's critical that I think we recognize what a vital element that they are in our infrastructure, in our ecosystem. Again, won't read the slides, but recommend them as a great reference to go back to because of their vital nature. The last thing that I thought was very important was the underrepresentation of nurses and clinically trained people on boards of directors. And I think as we talk about drug shortages today, nobody can bring home this issue better than our pharmacists, like Grace and like Adriana today, and our nurses, when we are not able to have drugs available. And if we get more nurses and more pharmacists on our board, that'll be critical. So again, I want to get done in 5 minutes, but I want to review for you the end-of-life learning from last month's webinar. We had Gene Huddleston, who's our partner at Mayo Clinic, the leader of mortality reviews at Mayo, and Patty Atkins and her colleagues talking about nurse-led end-of-life care. We polled you after the presentation. We said, do you want any more information on end-of-life care? 61% of you gave it a 10. This is off the charts. When we see that, we're coming back to you with this topic. On slide 31, go back and look at it. The topics that have been shared with us regarding end-of-life that you want us to address in future webinars are there on slide 31 and slide 32. We discussed the issue of the Innocence Project. This is a project that we've started that's an analog to using DNA. 25 years ago, a program was using DNA, began using DNA to reverse decisions against people using DNA as a new tool. We've started a program using the electronic medical record as a way of helping get just culture, and working with David Marks and others on this, and the issue of peer review and fraud and ethical behaviors in hospitals and healthcare. We ask you if you wanted more information on this, especially as it relates to patient safety. 45% of you gave it a 10. That means, yes, we will follow up with this topic for sure in a future webinar. And there were human resources topics on slide 37. We asked you about central line bloodstream infections last month, and we did not get a high response. It sounds like most programs are doing really well, so we'll put off that webinar until that time. Again, you all as an audience kind of tell us where we need to be. So I'm right on time at 11 minutes after the hour. Today, we have a terrific program regarding drug shortages. Quick story, and we are so honored to have Grace Magadman, a PharmD who's Director of Pharmacy at Children's Hospital of Orange County, helped us out in a critical issue. I got a phone call from a wonderful friend of ours, one of the moms of one of the boys who have been on my football teams as a coach in the school where my son attends, who said, listen, there's a girl that needs her last dose of chemotherapy. There's a drug shortage. Is there any way you could help? I started calling people. I called Dr. Botz, who's one of the speakers here on today, and a number of people, and I reached Grace, whose picture you see, lovely picture there, and Brooke is a young lady, very talented, which when we introduce her mom, we'll introduce her in more detail, very talented young lady, 15 years of age. I thought she was 16, but she's 15, and the drug shortage for her stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma put her in deep jeopardy. The last chemo dose that was absolutely critical was nowhere available. Grace helped us find that dose, as others did, and I'm sure even more than one dose went to the hospital in LA where she was being treated. But this was an example of putting us in harsh reality, this drug shortage, number one, and number two, what wonderful heroes we have in healthcare. And Grace, we thank you so much. When we introduce you at the end of the presentations, you and Sarah, Brooke's mother, are going to be reactors to it. When Grace helped us, she said, can you help me? And I said, what? And she said, can you help us bring national attention to the drug shortage problem? We really need help for this critical issue. And I said, I promise, Grace, we will. And so our team is fulfilling that promise to you, Grace, and thank you so much to the folks from Anderson that are going to speak today. So Gregory Botz, Dr. Greg Botz, is both a professor in critical care at the Division of Anesthesiology and Critical Care at the University of Texas Medical Center. He's also on faculty as an adjunct faculty member of the Stanford University. Without Greg Botz, we would not have a MedTech program we mentioned earlier, a fabulous champion for patient safety, a dear friend who I speak with almost every day. And when I called him, he said, this is an absolute critical issue. So I asked Greg to introduce the topic, and then we'll have one of his great colleagues from MD Anderson address the specifics, and then we'll have our reactor panel. So, Greg, would you take it away from there?
Great, Chuck. Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today to talk about this topic of drug shortages that clearly is a patient safety issue. Most of you know that I work at MD Anderson Cancer Center in the Texas Medical Center, probably the largest medical complex in the world with 56 institutions in healthcare and higher education. And even our institutions struggle with managing drug shortage issues in the care of our patients. So this is a very important issue to me. I think I became involved in patient safety. The hook that made me want to spend a lot of time looking at patient safety issues, including care delivery, was the publication of To Err is Human almost 20 years ago. And I think it's important to know that work is still going on. In fact, more publications coming out recently show that we probably under-recognized or underestimated the impact of healthcare delivery issues in the outcomes of our patients. There are lots of strategies that have evolved over the last 20 years to deal with patient safety issues. One example of that would be the National Patient Safety Goals from the Joint Commission. One of those goals has to do with medication management, both medication reconciliation and having strategies to avoid giving the wrong medication by having labeling that clearly denotes what medication is being given. But the issue of drug shortages and its impact on our patients really hasn't hit the forefront in this effort, in my opinion. I'm still a practicing anesthesiologist and intensivist, both at MD Anderson and at Stanford. As such, I teach residents and fellows, medical students, nursing students, pharmacy residents and students, and all sorts of allied health professionals on the care of our critically ill patients. And an integral part of that is imparting or integrating patient safety knowledge and skills into our practice model so that we are better practitioners at understanding how the healthcare system itself may add harm or may allow harm to reach our patients. Many of you may have seen this slide before. I use it in a lot of presentations. This is my world. This is a patient in my ICU. You can see it's a very complex system with lots of life support and monitoring modalities. I promise you there is a patient there because he came back after about 2 weeks and shook my hand and thanked me for the care that we delivered and gave me permission to use this photo in any of the talks that I do. But you can imagine that this patient who is receiving care in my ICU is incredibly vulnerable, is incredibly at risk for any of the systems issues and teamwork issues that are inherent to the way that we practice that can allow harm to reach the patient. So, and I think the drug shortage issue is one of those latent threats. It's one of those things that are still below the waterline, but still a particular threat to our patients because the availability of medications and the medications that are available to substitute can be a source of potential harm, either because we can't deliver the drug or because of the profile of the other medication. So when we talk about medication shortages, I think there are a lot of words that come into play about that issue. You know, the issue of therapeutic substitution. Is there another drug that's available that can be substituted and provide the same intent without adding very significant side effects or other problems? The issue of pharmaceutical equivalence or therapeutic equivalence, bioequivalence, all of those things are terms that are important when we talk about the drug shortage issue. When I think about these things, I look at it this way. The fact that we have drug shortages and need to substitute other drugs for our patients, we may get the same outcome, but I'm worried that we're sort of just adding potential harm or other unforeseen risks to our patients that we need to be aware of and mitigate. And I'm so fortunate that at MD Anderson we have a fantastic pharmacy division and we have fantastic critical care pharmacy support people and clinical pharmacy specialists that help us to mitigate these issues. And we have a very robust drug shortage management program, and we're very fortunate to have Adriana Rivera with us today, who is integral to managing that program to give the clinicians at the bedside situational awareness of the impact of drug shortages that might affect the care that we're delivering to our patients. So I'm very happy that Adriana is here today to be able to talk to us about drug shortages.
Thank you, Greg. Terrific intro. And we really are honored to have Adriana share what she can of strategy and tactics on this really daunting problem. She's a clinical pharmacy specialist. She received her doctorate in pharmacy at Northeastern University, and she then undertook a pharmacy specialty residency in ambulatory care at Boston Medical Center in '07. So you were there about the time that my family was there when I did a fellowship at Harvard, Adriana, and she currently is the clinical pharmacy specialist in drug information at the University of Texas at MD Anderson. Her responsibilities are to coordinate drug shortage management, and her drug shortage management responsibilities include facilitating weekly meetings with Division of Pharmacy, collaborating with the multidisciplinary stakeholders for clinical input and prescribing guidance, and facilitating institutional communication to providers and staff on current drug shortages. And Adriana, we really appreciate you tackling this issue. And as you know, we have a pretty broad audience of both clinical and administrative leaders, small hospitals to large hospitals, and this is going to be very, very helpful. So, Adriana, take it away.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be a panelist and allowing me to share some of our strategies and experiences of managing drug shortages. And to echo Dr. Botz, drug shortages do continue to be a struggle and a challenge for us in delivering high-quality patient care. And for myself and for our drug shortage management team, we feel as if this is now a weekly occurrence that we're faced with a new medication with a supply issue, either it's on back order or there's some shortage impending, or that we continue to struggle with ongoing shortages such as the IV fluids and injectable opioids that continue on to nationwide. So over the next few minutes, I would like to briefly provide an overview of the drug shortages, like what are the characteristics of causing a shortage, what are the impacts that they are having. Also, to discuss management for drug shortage, some strategies that we do here at MD Anderson, and explain some ongoing efforts to improve the national crisis of drug shortages. So I'm sure that many of us are now familiar with the following headlines and may even continue to struggle with these shortages, such as parental solutions and opioids. And here at MD Anderson, we continue to manage these issues on a daily basis. And even though the IV fluid situation has improved, we do continue to struggle with certain fluids, such as dextrose solutions or solutions that are available in different bags, such as non-PVC bags that we use particularly for preparation of chemotherapy. And of course, like many healthcare systems and hospitals, we continue to struggle daily with the availability of injectable opioids. And of course, recently, in the past few days, the FDA has announced an impending shortage of EpiPen, which further illustrates that drug shortages can affect all aspects of healthcare. So what are the reasons of drug shortages and what are the main causes? And looking over the drug shortages that were reported in 2017, majority of them, 53% of the causes, were unknown or the manufacturer did not disclose the reason. Though in most cases, drug shortages are largely a result of quality control issues during the manufacturing process, but then manufacturers then seize any production to address the problem. And this is reported about 30% of the drug shortages in 2017. In the situation when a drug shortage is, when a drug is manufactured by a few competitors and any halted production from one manufacturer, particularly those that supply a large percentage of the U.S. market, does create a disruption of supply to other manufacturers as they're unable to keep up with the demand due to the lack of resources or manufacturing facilities. And of course, we cannot go without acknowledging the devastation that Hurricane Maria brought onto the island of Puerto Rico and its people. And of course, it did affect many manufacturing infrastructures for nearly 50 pharmaceutical companies, including Baxter's facility, where they produce small volume parental solutions and amino acids, which are essential for daily patient care. So the annual shortages by year has improved over the past 10 years. In 2011, there was a heightened awareness and crisis, whereas over 260 drug shortages were reported, and these shortages included basic essential medications for basic daily patient care, such as dextrose parental solutions, electrolyte solutions, and anesthetics. And as a result of the critical shortages in 2011, legislation was then enacted in 2012 to help strengthen the FDA's ability to respond and resolve drug shortages. So the FDA Safety and Innovation Act of 2012 was passed in July of 2012, and it gives the FDA important and new authorities related to drug shortage. It allows them to intervene when appropriate. This legislation also requires manufacturer of all prescription drugs, including biologics, to notify of a permanent discontinuance or temporary interruption in manufacturing. The notification must be within 6 months, if possible, of any interruption, and if not possible, then as soon as possible, but no later than 5 days after a discontinuance or interruption of manufacturing. Of note, though, the FDA does not require a manufacturer to disclose the reason for interruption or discontinuing of any manufactured product, or does it expect the manufacturer to disclose the expected duration for the supply issue or an estimated time frame for resolving the supply issue. So even with this legislation in place, many in the healthcare community agree that more can be done to help mitigate the impacts of drug shortages. So what are the impacts of drug shortage? How does it affect everyone? And it really does. It's a dynamic force. It impacts clinical, financial, and emotional state of all that that are involved in providing health care to patients. It affects day-to-day patient care from our staff who in pharmacy, nurses, physicians, into the patient. It does impact the institution's finances if we have to bring an alternative that may be a little bit more costly than what we're previously purchasing, or having to bring in some new workflows and labor costs to manufacture products. And of course, it does cause some emotional strain, as it can be difficult if you have a short notice of a supply issue and unable to locate a drug or try to figure out very quickly what would be the next best thing for your patient, if at all possible. So the clinical impact of a drug shortage can be multifaceted. It can compromise patient care and outcomes. It can cause delays or interrupted treatment or procedures. It can be we can have alternatives that are less safe or effective alternatives if we're unable to find the drug that's on shortage. There can be also no available products or available alternatives, and also they also lead to medication errors and adverse patient outcomes. And that's probably due to lack of familiarity from our staff of any of the alternatives. If there has to be a new process or procedure in place to safely dispense and administer the medication, that all has to be worked through, and perhaps some of our staff will not know how to safely dispense and administer a new product that has been in abruptly due to a shortage, and lack of standardization of alternatives. I think it's very dynamic depending on the drug that's on short. If it's an antihypertensive, there's multiple agents available, how each has a caveat and characteristics based on your patient, but then if it comes to a certain chemotherapy drug that is now a front line for a certain cancer type, you may be limited on what is available for your patient. And also from a safety perspective, the American Society of Health System Pharmacists surveyed about 323 members to assess the impact of the small volume parenteral solutions at their hospital or system, and it revealed that 61% of responders indicated the shortage had a severe impact on their daily operations and patient care. And I know here at MD Anderson we struggled quite a bit. In fact, there were some days that we were just shuffling product around just to make ends meet in certain high volume areas. Also, the Institute of Safe Practice Medicine surveyed 300 healthcare practitioners, and they revealed that 21% of the responders say that they were aware of at least one medication error related to the shortage, and 67% of those errors that were reported were associated with a wrong dose or a wrong concentration of a new alternative that was used in response to a shortage. There's also the financial impact, where you can see increase of personnel resources. There have been some times where we've had to increase our personnel to help batch new syringes in a workflow that we created for the IV fluid shortage, or to help, if we had to make new syringes or new IV piggybacks or batch, anything to help get that product to our patients. Also, greater drug purchasing costs if we had to purchase another alternative that was a little bit more costly, and then additional costs for the treatment of any adverse events that may have occurred to a patient. And finally, the emotional impact. This is can be felt all across the institution up to the patient at most times, that there's frustration, anger, mistrust. It could pose a strain on professional relationships. The ISMP survey of 300 healthcare practitioners also revealed that 62% of their respondents reported being frequently or always frustrated because of a drug shortage. And that's really just because of the nature of us in healthcare wanting to deliver the best care that we can for our patients and not wanting to, succumb to any alternative that may not be effective. So here at MD Anderson, our approach to drug shortage management is multifaceted. First of all, we do coordinate with our leadership of the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee. We find that their guidance is helpful in making sure that we convey the appropriate messages to our staff, and particularly to our providers, that we have, considered all aspects of how a drug is being used and what the alternatives will bring. So we do coordinate with them and meet with them weekly to let them know what impending shortages we have and where we need to put in some implementations or alternative plans. We do have weekly drug shortage meetings to facilitate planning, and sometimes in the height of the IV fluid shortage and the ongoing now opioid shortage, we sometimes meet multiple times a week just to make sure that we're on track to meet our day-to-day needs. And then, of course, we do have day-to-day management and monitoring conducted by our pharmacy procurement specialists and ourselves in drug information. And whenever we start working up the process of a new drug shortage or have been alerted of a new drug shortage, we have a systemized process. So we standardize our process to meet the guidelines recommended by the American Society of Health System Pharmacists, guidelines for managing drug shortages. So we start from the beginning where a drug shortage is identified. We have two assessments. One is an operational assessment where we work diligently with our pharmacy operations team, and then we have a therapeutic assessment where we reach out to stakeholders in patient care areas, such as if it's a drug that is pertaining to the ICU or to anesthesia or to a certain medical oncology group, we reach out to them to let them know what the situation is and what are the appropriate alternatives, if there are any, and how we start to streamline the process of implementing a plan. Then we also conduct a drug shortage impact analysis where we make sure that everything's in line before we enact a plan, whether that be that we update our information technology systems, we have appropriate communication in place, we know where to purchase the products, and as well as that we have a plan for monitoring. We then establish the plan and then communicate the plan out and implement. So in the operational assessment, we start beginning by validating our drug shortage details. Typically, we are notified by our procurement specialist when there's an attempt to order a drug that has now been having a supply issue through our wholesaler. And also our wholesaler does provide us information that there is some supply issues impending on a certain product that we do order. Once we're notified that there is a potential issue, then we start looking into avenues like how long is this going to be? What products is affected? Is it only one manufacturer? Are there multiple manufacturers? This is a raw shortage issue, a raw material shortage issue. Then once we start having some validation of those details, we often do call the manufacturer to see if there are any updates, when they anticipate to have any resolvement or product available. And we also do utilize information from our drug shortage websites through the American Society of Health System Pharmacists and the FDA. Then once we have validated the supply issue details, then we go on to determining what we have on supply on hand. And to me, this is probably the most tedious and laborious act that we look into. Essentially, we are looking at every nook and cranny where we have drugs stored throughout our institution. So we look at all of our automated dispensing cabinets, pharmacy satellites, medication rooms, fluid rooms, and any off-site pharmacy areas where a drug is stored. And that way we're able to determine how much we have on hand to later on estimate the time to impact the healthcare system or the patient. We also start to evaluate if there's any other supply or formulation of the drug that's on shortage. It may be a different concentration that might be available. Maybe it's a different tablet or oral solution that we can consider going to. And we look to where they're also being available. Are they available from our wholesaler? Do we have to place a direct order through a certain manufacturer? And then we also look to estimate like how long the drug shortage is going to last us and how it's going to impact us. We look at our purchase history or our true use. Our purchase history rely on what we have from our wholesaler of how often we purchase. For the most part, true use is the best to give us give us an estimate of how long this issue is going to last us. We do utilize our EHR system for reports of how many times we've dispensed and administered a drug to give us better guidance of, with the current supply, how long do we estimate that we're going to have supply in hand and not run out, and if such, consider those in our contingency plans. And then we determine the supply of the alternative product. So if there are alternatives, how long are those alternatives going to be available? Oftentimes when a drug goes on shortage and there are alternatives available, eventually in time those alternatives are also impacted by the shortage, and later on they will also have supply issues themselves. So when we're looking for alternative sources of procurement, we always want to make sure that we have valid sources, such as using some secondary wholesalers if that's available to your institution, outsourcing facilities, although these are now been regulated by the FDA. In 2013, due to the tragic events of the New England Compounding Center, the FDA enacted the Drug Safety and Quality Act to regulate all of these outsourcing facilities to make sure that they comply with proper manufacturing regulations and quality. So a lot of these facilities do help in some ways of providing drug that may be on shortage, although they may be limited in supply if it's a raw material shortage, and also do require some time to ramp up their production to meet your facility's needs. And of course, with the gray market, you always want to avoid if there is no way to validate the integrity of the product that may be purchased through the gray market. For the therapeutic assessment, here's where we identify what areas, specialties, which physicians or clinicians are using the drug that's in short. We identify the primary patient population. We look for the therapeutic alternatives or sources that we can consider using. We also start involving our patient care and service area stakeholders, such as our physicians, our nurses, to consider the possible restrictions for existing supply if needed. We often do that if there are certain high-risk patients that may benefit from this drug that's on short the most, and others may potentially, still have a good quality effect with an alternative. We also try to prepare for when there's no available supply, which we call our doomsday plan. And I think with every contingency plan, you should always have that in mind for the fact that, again, it's all based on availability of the product. And if there's nothing available, eventually in time, there might be some point where you may not have no drug available. And then you want to review your current utilization and evaluate for any changes that are considered best practice. And this is kind of, in a way, a silver lining to drug shortages. It has often made us look at our usage and think about, are we using this appropriately? Are we using it safely? Are there any opportunities that we can improve the usage of our medication that's on short to, one, to help it be used in the best practice manner? And if there are any impending shortages in the future, we now know how to manage this way and consider other alternatives. So in one way, it does bring in light to evaluating how you use a drug appropriately before you start making any other changes. From a shortage impact analysis, here we start estimating what the impact will be to patient care. We looked at if in the alternatives, are there any therapeutic differences? Are there any possible equivalent products that could be used? Are there any therapeutic interchanges that we can be considered? Some may be very simple if it's such as like an H2 blocker. We can go from a ranitidine to famotidine, but some would be much more difficult in light of a chemotherapy. Prescribing processes. Are there any things that you have to update in your prescribing process to either make your providers aware of the situation of the shortage? Also, will you have that available in your EHR or whatever your process is for order entry for your provider to know that this is an alternative? Do you know your process of how you're going to be ordering your medication into your facility and where you're going to be stocking it, whether it be in a Pyxis or your central pharmacy? And then administration process. We cannot forget about our nurses. We need to make sure if there's an alternative that we're bringing in, that we do have processes in line if it's a different type of administration that needs to be done, perhaps something that needs to now be given IV push versus IV piggyback, which we have done often in light of the IV fluid shortage. And then, of course, we look into the financial ramifications of cost of labor for preparation of a new product, and as well as the cost of procuring the new product if needed. For your information technology, now in the era of the electronic health record, it is essential that everything is up to date before you go on into implementing the plan with a new alternative or having some type of a notification of a shortage. We utilize our electronic health record here at MD Anderson as also a form of notification to our providers. As Dr. Botz showed earlier, we do utilize email as our first round or method of communication, but email is often overlooked, and of course many providers get thousands of emails weekly. So within order entry, our providers are alerted of if there's a drug on shortage that they're attempting to order, and if there are any alternatives identified, we do give them guidance as to those alternatives as well. We do utilize functions such as best practice advisories and alternative alerts within our electronic health record. So when you are implementing a plan for an alternative agent, you want to make sure that your EHR has been updated to include that alternative agent and its prescribing is appropriate within the EHR. If you do have any clinical decision support alerts, make sure you test them and they're accurate to what you're trying to propose as a plan. We also want to verify barcode scanning. This is often used for our nurses and to make sure that they're scanning across appropriately and they're not having any errors that will delay a patient's therapy. And identify to make sure that the medication administration record is also up to date with any type of new medications that are being brought on or new administration processes that have been identified. And then, of course, we don't want to forget our smart pumps. We want to make sure that our smart pump library is updated with any new parameters for the alternative agent and as well as any changes to drug concentrations. I know for the opioid shortage, we did have a change of concentration to our PCA, so we ensured that we had everything updated in our pump before we went live with using our new concentration of PCAs. So communication of the plan, you want to make sure that all of your providers and staff know that there is a drug shortage. Oftentimes we do hear from many providers that we weren't aware, but, we want to do the best we can. So we do the multimodal process where we, send out communications through email. We have a drug shortage website, which I'll show in just a few minutes, and we do utilize our EHR for alerts. We want to show what the effective date is for any plans that are going to be implemented, any new processes or temporary guidelines, and identify any therapeutic alternatives if there's such available for the drug that's on shortage. So here at MD Anderson, we use Severity Levels, and we implemented this about 7 years ago with assistance with our Office for Performance Improvement to help, better communicate to our staff the significance of drug shortages. So we've implemented the stoplight system. We have a level red, a level yellow, and a level green. And level red, for all instances, means that there's no drug available and no one can prescribe it. Level yellow means that we do have a limited supply and there may be some restriction use criteria applied to it. And a level green, usually when a drug has gone to a level red or a level yellow and things have improved, we move it to a level green to know that it's still at risk for a supply issue, but we are managing carefully and that our current use right now, based on our current use, we have sufficient supply to meet our patients' demands. Also, we do utilize level green if there's a national shortage that has been identified, but so far we have not yet impacted our institution. We will mark it as a level green for that providers are aware in the event that it becomes a level yellow or a level red. So as Dr. Botz showed earlier, we do utilize email communication. We do have a standard template of information that we place for all of our providers and staff. This is just an example of one from Conivaptan, and we have information on the shortage status, the reason for the shortage, estimated resupply, although often those do change, so we do have to update these quite regularly. Any implications to our prescribers, so if we do have any alternatives that we have identified, we list them there, or any type of other procedures or guidelines that they have to do differently, we list it there. We do also add a section for nursing if there is anything that impacts their care. And then for pharmacy as well, we want to make sure that our pharmacists are well aware of the shortage, and if there is an attempt to order something, that they notify the provider that there is no shortage. Here are some potential alternatives, or what the next steps are them to do to order to continue to take care of their patient. And then we do provide a link for the providers to go onto our drug shortage website. Here's one more example of our email communication that we recently utilized for the opioid shortage. Again, we do signify, our shortage status by applying a level yellow color. We give, again, more information on the reason for the shortages, and then implications to prescribers. And here was a little bit more lengthier, but we gave more information as to how we would like, our providers to help us manage the shortage, to conserve supply, the potential to use oral opioid formulations whenever possible was our go-to, and then who to reserve IV and PCA formulations with. And we list some criteria there below. And a lot of our criteria, again, is developed within our stakeholder meetings. In the beginning of the IV opioid shortage, we did meet with a large group of anesthesiologists, our acute pain service, our chronic pain service, our palliative care service, and as well as members from the ICU and EC to kind of go over and develop criteria of how we can restrict our limited supply of IV opioids. And then here's a screenshot of our drug shortage website. This is available for all of our staff and providers to access. It is on our hospital intranet page. It is updated weekly by the Drug Information Service. Again, it has everything logged in on our stoplight system with level red, level yellow, level green, and there's links to individual content so that the provider doesn't have to go into reading multiple pages. You just click on the link and it'll take you directly to that information you need for pertaining to the drug shortage you're looking for. It is, again, updated weekly, but the content into the individual shortage is only updated when there is new information available. And I'll show you here a screenshot. This is one particular within our morphine PCAs and infusions. How we're being impacted, what are the implications to our pharmacists, to our prescribers, and then the last day the content was changed. So we do try to update each one of those regularly to stay up to date and to help our providers understand what the situation is for each shortage. So once you have developed a plan, you have all your stakeholder input, you then begin to monitor, to implement and monitor. So once you have your information systems changes in place, you have anything within your EHR that needs to be added, your Pyxis is updated, your smart pump is updated, you have your inventory system in place with how we're going to be procuring the drug, where is it going to be stocked, then you start planning for when we're going to implement, and then you continue to monitor. Of course, then when the drug does come back to the market that was on shortage, you do plan for the return. We do document all the interventions that we've made to manage the shortage. We'll go back to look to see what we changed in certain systems, if we updated the EHR, whether we updated some smart pumps, as well as if we update any other pharmacy dispensing systems. We do plan to, if we did have to bring an alternative, to plan to deplete that alternative agent prior to returning to the preferred agent, just to avoid any additional waste and increased costs. And then there are some times, though, where we do find that the alternative agent has been just as effective. Maybe it was a little bit more cost-effective to have that versus the drug that first went on shortage. So we do have some instances where we do maintain that alternative because it was considered more of a best practice. Now, what is the future for drug shortages? And unfortunately, drug shortages will continue to exist. So further collaboration with healthcare stakeholders and policymakers is needed to find solutions to minimize and prevent drug shortages, with the ultimate goal to minimize any interruption in providing quality patient care. And more recently, in November 2017, a large group of the clinician associations and as well as legislative leaders met at a round table to discuss the impending IV fluid shortage, its impact in patient care. And members that were included were the American Society of Health System Pharmacists, the American Society of Anesthesiologists, the American Society of Clinical Oncologists, just to name a few, were in the table with the FDA and the Department of Health and Human Services to discuss the impact of these shortages. And they do acknowledge that there have been some improvement. However, the global impact of what happened to infrastructure and manufacturing of essential life-saving medications such as IV fluids was detrimental to daily patient care. They have reached out that more needs to be done, and more recently, the American Society of Health System Pharmacists has reached out to all of its members as a call of action for us to notify our legislative representative to make them aware that drug shortages are continuing to happen. They continue to impact our patient care and continue to impact healthcare facilities from delivering quality patient care in most levels. Here are some resources to the FDA. One more thing. For key strategies, preparation, standardization, communication, it's always essential to prepare for drug shortages. For us, it really helped us to standardize. Initially, it was more of a chaotic process, or I guess we say controlled chaos process. But once we have standardization of our drug shortage management strategies, it helps in a bit to know that, okay, we can do this. Let's find a way that we can improve and make sure that we deliver still safe patient care. And then, of course, communication. Communication is essential to notify all of our providers and stakeholders that this is an issue nationally. Again, just to be aware and help if there needs to be a conservation of supply, to continue to conserve supply. And then monitoring, again, we still continue to monitor supply for IV fluids and IV opioids on a daily basis, as those are the largest, most impactful shortages going on right now. But then we still have daily notifications of possible, impending shortages on electrolytes, or and most recently phenytoin, or as well as now EpiPen. So those are things that we now struggle with on a daily basis. And then here are some drug shortage resources available. The FDA's drug shortage website is maintained frequently and up to date, and as well as the ASHP drug shortage website. And this one, more from a clinician standpoint, does provide more information on if there's any alternatives in place, if there are other potential alternatives or clinical impacts that you may want to know on a drug shortage, and potentially any alternatives that can be used. So from a healthcare professional, that the ASHP drug shortage website does provide a little bit more information to help with quality patient care. And I offer any questions.
Thank you so much, Adriana. We really, really appreciate your help here. And what we'll do is very quickly, I'm going to address the questions that we're going to ask of our audience so they can fill out the polling while we have our reactors discuss the topic. The first question is, would you like more information on drug shortage issues? Adriana, you did a beautiful job on this, and I think that the question is, would our folks like to have more from frontline hospitals, perhaps smaller hospitals, medical centers where they don't have the resources that Anderson does, and discuss how they've tackled it, or perhaps how they've tackled it together? If you would like to have such a future webinar, please score it high on the survey that I'll ask Kyle to put up in the lower right-hand corner. Thank you, Kyle. You've got it up. And then the second question is a free text entry question. What topics would you like to have covered in terms of the types of medications, perhaps, that would be key issues? We regularly, the second survey question is regarding medication errors and adverse events. Since we are covering a medication-related topic today, we thought we would ask the question. This is right squarely in the wheelhouse of our patient safety leaders, and many have a really good handle on it. However, we know that we continue to have these challenges with medication errors and adverse events, especially in the emergency department, and now related to the opioid overdoses. But specifically in hospital or out of hospital ambulatory care, medication errors and adverse events. Would you like another webinar? If you will, score it high. If there are topics you'd like to have us address, please address those as well. So it really is a great pleasure to now give some folks a wonderful opportunity to meet and chat. We have had such a wonderful blessing of having this topic kind of come in over the transom to us, and it came over the transom, as I mentioned at the introduction, through the critical need of the last chemo agent of a young lady that's here in Southern California, and we would like to have her mom, Sarah Bezikoff, react first, because I know you'd like to thank Grace for her great work and kind of address this issue as a patient family member. Sarah is a business owner, a mother, a health advocate who's dedicated to improving the outcomes for children battling cancer, and as a former cancer doctor, there could be nothing more challenging. Her daughter Brooke is a 15-year-old with Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 4. She's an actress, a singer who's appeared on Broadway, Carnegie Hall, and most recently won Best Actress, actually, at the Young Entertainer Awards. And Brooke is working on a book to support other young people battling cancer. So, Sarah, we're going to give you the opportunity to lead off as our reactor panel, and then we'll go to Grace. Sarah?
Okay, thank you. Well, I just want to thank everybody at Chuck and all the panelists for allowing me to speak today and talk about our experience with drug shortages. It's such a critical issue and affected us, obviously, very personally. My daughter was diagnosed first week in November of 2017 with Hodgkin's lymphoma. We were quickly informed she was stage 4, and pretty immediately started our chemotherapy protocol with her, and went through treatment. Everything, seemed to be going well. We're at our last, had an appointment the week before she was to receive her last chemo round, and at that appointment with our pediatric oncologist, we were informed that the drug etoposide, which she was taking as part of her regimen because she actually had been allergic to etoposide, which is the usual medication that's part of her protocol, they'd completely run out. And not only had they run out of etoposide, they'd also run out of etoposide, because kind of going back to what some of the panelists were discussing before, apparently etoposide had been substituted for patients kind of coming up on this month because they'd run out of etoposide, and now they had run out of both. Well, Brooke had a severe allergic reaction to the first drug and actually had to have the etoposide, which had, I think they removed the phosphate portion of that medication. So neither of those drugs were available, and it was 4 days before she was supposed to be having this round 5 of her final chemo, which was the most important one because it was, the one to completely eradicate any cancerous cells still present. And I had asked the doctor at the time, well, what is the plan B? What's the alternative? And she said, we're in the same trying to get it. The drug company has been telling us, it's coming, and it has not come, and it's now time for her round 5, and we're going to have to switch her to a different protocol. And I said at the time, well, what is the outcome of that? Because the outcomes for the standardized protocol for Hodgkin's are really good, the percentage. And she said, yes, we don't have data on that. So for me as a parent, my whole world dropped again, as it already had, 5 months before when she got diagnosed. And now I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is not going to, work. We're going to switch it to another protocol. We have no idea what the reaction is going to be. She's going to have these high percentage results that kids have when they go through this ABD CP treatment for Hodgkin. So I immediately asked her, can I try myself to try to locate these mutations? And she said, yeah, absolutely. We've had no luck in doing that, but, you can try. And I immediately went into action. And so I'm so thankful for my friends and putting me in touch with Chuck Denham and, of course, Grace Magdaman, who are so grateful to both of you for being able to secure the medication that got sent up to CHLA so that she could have her final round of chemo. And now, happily, she's in remission and has no evidence of disease. And it's really thanks to the two of you for helping that outcome be so positive, and we're forever grateful. and also so concerned now that this issue's been opened up for us, because I was unaware as a parent, my daughter being a patient, that this even happened, that there was drug shortages that could happen in, such a, pediatric oncology, chemotherapy. How could all of a sudden these medications not be available to kids who need them or to patients in general? So it's really touched a button in me and wanted me to become an advocate for, going forward that this is not going to happen to other people, and to try to prevent anyone from going through that kind of scare and horror of not being able to, save your child. And so I'm just really grateful to be a part of the panel and be able to share our story.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, and let Brooke know that many of us are praying for her. We didn't have a picture until last night, but my 12-year-old and I, every morning at about 10 minutes to 7, include her in our quiet time prayer together by name. So we're so glad that she's doing so well. And a shout out to Lori Roberts, who is the mom here in our network of friends who you reached out to, and it was Lori that took a chance of calling me. And then the big win was with Grace, because after about 20 phone calls, I found the kindest, most wonderful person, and they typically always are in pharmacy. I don't know why, Grace, but Grace is fantastic, and I want Grace to just comment on the experience, but then Grace build on what you heard Adriana talk about. Then we'll go to Greg, and then to Arlene, and then back to Sarah. But Grace is the director of the pharmacy services at CHOC, the Children's Hospital of Orange County. Oddly enough, I found Grace here in my own neighborhood, although I was calling Anderson, talked to Dr. Botz. I talked to people all over the country trying to find this last dose, and wonderfully found it close within driving distance, which was crazy because I'd called everywhere. And she has passionately and positively been a driving medication management and pediatric patient safety champion. She serves as the Medication Safety and Pharmacy Therapeutics Committee member and participates in various task forces. And she's contributed to patient safety organizations with the lessons learned. She has her doctorate in pharmacy from the University of California, San Francisco, and she is also a Maxwell team coach, focusing on certification as a coach to help other people, and just a more wonderful person. And really, Grace, you were the one shining light of all these many phone calls I made, and you and I had a number of conversations for this to happen. So, Grace, on behalf of all of us, we want to thank you for being such an honorable and wonderful caregiver, and we'd like you to now comment.
Wow, those are such kind words. Thank you so much. Sarah, your story just brings tears to my eyes. I have, a couple of boys that are extremely healthy, so I'm very grateful. But thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of your journey. And I'm so encouraged and so blessed to hear that Brooke is doing so well, really. And my cup is filled and overflowing hearing that I could contribute to that. I want to commend Adriana for such a thorough presentation and really some systematic, actionable strategies. You make it sound so easy, but I think that the one thing that I wrote down on my paper as I was taking notes was your doomsday plan, and I really love that because it really feels like that, and unfortunately feels like that often daily. I think about, I'm blessed to be part of a team that is extremely nimble and highly reliable, but, having to operate at that level for such a long period of time inevitably leads to burnout and loss of resiliency, and that in and of itself can be a contributor to errors. I think, I'm glad to hear that there is so much structure in your approach, and there's certainly some pearls that I could pull out of here to apply in my own organization. But there is that recognition. Obviously, we're not as large as MD Anderson, and so there are some constraints as far as resources go to be able to manage the shortages. I think one of the things that really impacted me, especially as it related to Brooke's and Sarah's story, is is the fact that, and it ties into what Adriana said about we go to an alternative, and then that alternative becomes exhausted, and then both are unavailable. And we as clinicians are left, scratching our heads thinking, okay, well, what's next? What do we have? And sometimes that doomsday, we don't have time to plan for it, and it just really is thrusted right in front of us on a whether it's a daily basis or a weekly basis, but it really confronts us and forces us to drop everything else, kind of set aside everything else and react to it, which is not really the best thing to do either. We hate to react. We'd rather respond with great thought and care. The part to it that was really heartbreaking too is that, we were forced to ration our supply because we knew exactly how much we had on hand. We would be doing daily, sometimes multiple times a day, inventory counts on what we've got, what's gone out, how much do we expect to last us, how many days or how many patients can a patient complete a course, and really just continue to communicate that with our medical leadership, because they were the ones that were ultimately making those decisions in conjunction with patients and families about this is what we've got to offer, these are your alternatives, and there may or may not be data to be able to support the effectiveness of these therapies, and I can only imagine how overwhelming and demoralizing that information must be to a parent receiving that, especially at the end of a course. So I think to me, whatever I could have done to possibly help in that capacity, again, I'm just grateful for the ability to do that. But I also recognize that we're not able to do that for everybody, and that's again the struggle that I personally go through, because I just can't. I don't have the ability to. I think for the drug shortages, it really takes a village. Adriana really highlighted so many of the facets that need consideration, whether it's communication, the clinical aspect of it, of course the financial aspects, because a lot of this work goes on behind the scenes and it's not very apparent. We don't necessarily get credit, if you will, for the extra resources that we have to bring in. But at the end of the day, I think, as good soldiers, we do what we need to do to make sure that we take care of patient care. Much like MD Anderson, we've also had to go to making syringes to be able to ration our supply and really exhaust it and use it and not waste it. But with that also has pressure on our staff, and not just pressure from a workload standpoint, but it also increases the chance for repetitive motion injuries, carpal tunnel from having to constantly make these IVs. And if you don't have IV automation, we have the benefit of having that, but if you don't, then I could imagine that this experience isn't singular to just chalk. And I fear for that. The one thing that I will say also about the Children's Hospital, I have to say that the collaboration between the hospitals has been a very good thing for patients, and I think that's part of the reason why we were able to be successful for Brooks therapy, because of the relationship that CHOC has with CHLA and having mutual beneficial professional relationships with the staff at both places. So I think about what can be done from a larger national, global standpoint. I, as one pharmacist in one hospital, can only impact, the immediate community and the patients that I serve. But again, how do we collectively move the masses to have some better outcomes, some relief in sight? Because Adriana's right, this isn't going away, but we're not going to be able to sustain a high level of reliability over a long term if without being more creative about it. And sometimes the creativity can actually unravel some of the safety processes as we go along. And how do we make sure that we don't catch ourselves, shoot ourselves in the foot, if you will, by doing so?
Well, it's so clear your earnest desire to help, and it just makes me feel great to know that we have caregivers like you and your field. And I know your societies have been so great to work with. I had the honor of working with them with the national standards, and it's been great. I also want to, before we go to Dr. Botz, because I know some of the things you said, I know he can build on, and then Adriana, and then Arlene. But Sarah, I just want to thank you on behalf of other parents for taking. You took the lead. You went out to the social network, and not. I don't mean the technology. I mean the networks of friends to go to bat for your daughter. And it touches my heart to hear and know that, and I know how tough that must have been in those moments. And it was just so great to see you do that. And Lori Roberts, who actually was the connector of all of us, who's not on the webinar today, who's just a wonderful other mom who helped connect the dots. But Sarah, your courage and your desire, and thank you for being here with us, and thank you, Grace. Greg, tough act to follow these wonderful women. Go ahead.
Well, it's a very impactful story that is being played out in many, many places across our country and across the world. And from a practitioner's standpoint, from someone who's at the sharp end of the spear taking care of patients, it is so critical to have a team of people like Adriana supporting us so that we have the right information at hand to make decisions when we are faced with drug shortages. Without that, I think we would be very much behind the eight ball in providing less than optimal care. I want to also highlight the fact that substitution of medications and concentrations of medications or delivery models for medications in our healthcare delivery system adds tremendous risk. Because the medications are different, they may have different pharmacokinetic or pharmacodynamic features. In other words, the way that it's delivered, how long it lasts, what other side effects it might have, are important considerations because this is not something that we normally use, and we're having to adjust and adapt our delivery methods and our understanding of the side effects, et cetera, in the complexity of caring for sick patients. So, for instance, an example, recently I had a young woman in the ICU with an advanced GYN cancer who also had very significant cancer pain, was on a large amount of opiate medications to manage her cancer pain as an outpatient. And she was admitted with a pneumonia and ended up in our ICU requiring mechanical ventilation. And it was very difficult to oxygenate and ventilate the lungs because of her pneumonia and some other consequences. And we did not have supplies of the pain medications that she was normally using for her significant cancer pain. But I wanted to be able to increase the amount of pain medicine that we were using so that her oxygen requirements would be reduced, and it would be perhaps easier to deliver oxygen to the cells if they weren't so hungry for air, if you will. But having to devise a strategy to do that without medications that we normally use added tremendous risk. We didn't have IV formulation for one of the medications, and so we were using it by giving it down her feeding tube. Well, how well was that going to be absorbed, and were there other side effects from that might take place? Made us work outside our comfort zone, and we had to be very careful that the way that we implemented this strategy for pain management in this patient took into account all of the complexities of this substitution of other medications. I'm thankful that we have very well-trained clinical pharmacists on our team that help us go through that, but the average care delivery system in the community doesn't have perhaps such a deep team of resources, and those sort of considerations, those decisions, those orders that are written can certainly add to the potential risk or harm that can reach a patient. And as patient safety advocates and patient safety practitioners, I think that is one of those things that can keep us up at night, trying to make sure that we do the right things for our patients, that we get the right medications, that we get the right therapeutic intent as part of our plan for taking care of whatever the problem might be. So this is yet another patient safety challenge that we have that has sort of been bubbling below the surface, but is now really starting to gain traction and become part of the plan that we have to make in the care of patients on a day-to-day basis. And I'm very fortunate. I'm thankful that we have people like Adriana who can help support us as a large institution in managing the struggle we have with drug shortages. And I think the important thing is maintaining situational awareness at the bedside of the implication of those medication shortages and how, as a team, we're going to best care for all of our patients.
Well, Greg, as always, wonderfully thoughtful things. And as I listen to how eloquent both you and Adriana are, I liken back to when I did my medical oncology rotation through, and the time I spent at Anderson when I did my radiation oncology residency, and how well organized and what a terrific approach that you all took to the chemo patients. It was fantastic, and God bless you, Greg, for you're taking care of the sickest patients on the planet in your ICUs. Adriana, one thing you mentioned in your talk, and I've got two questions for you.
Sure.
The first one is on this gray market, and I'll tell a quick story to set it up. We were flying back from Boston one day, and my wife, who I love more than life itself, who's I put in the same category with Lori Roberts, who connected us, Sarah, said, "Chuck, you have to look at this." And I said, "Listen, I am busy." She said, "No, you have to look at this." And it was a Vanity Fair article about the gray market. It was entitled "Risky Business," and I recommend anybody going to read it because I had no idea what this gray market was, and that there are so many states where people get a drug wholesaler license with like no training whatsoever, and that they get chemo drugs, and especially the more expensive drugs, and they're storing them in refrigerators in garages and in hangars and in strip clubs. And as you read the article, I was going, I just can't believe this. And so David Classen and I did a presentation at IHI on this because we were just blown away by this gray market. For those that don't know what it is and what the enormous risks are when you run out of drugs and then you have to go to these wholesalers, what the enormous risks are, especially in cancer drugs. Could you address that for us, number one? And then number two, the question is, what does the 200-bed hospital that doesn't have all your talent do when they run into shortages? Can they team up with others? What can the smaller hospitals do when they run out?
Sure. So to answer your question about the gray market, unfortunately, it is scary and it does exist. And I think a few weeks ago, our procurement specialist did get a fax from this company outside somewhere in Florida if we needed some, I believe it was one of the chemotherapy drugs that we were having some issue with and such. And we were like, this doesn't look like obviously we knew from the flyer that this was a potentially gray market area, but for, smaller institutions that are bone dry or whatever drug that's on shortage, sometimes you're at the risk of what can I get and what do I need for my patient. But, you cannot validate the integrity of that product. We don't know where it's been manufactured, where it has been stored. Also, there is the risk of price gouging. You may end up spending a lot more money than what the drug is really manufactured for quality that you're not suspecting, you don't know. And they do exist, and they tend to pop up the most when there is a shortage of a drug and people are just willing to, institutions or people are willing to buy with whatever is needed. So unfortunately, they do exist too. And with a lot of these outsourcing facilities, one of the things that we do here at MD Anderson before we go into business plan is we validate where they're procuring their raw materials from, what are their QA processes, as well as, a turnaround time if there is a manufacturing quality control issue and what they do to intervene on those. So they do exist, unfortunately, and they, for when you are in a situation where you don't know where to get drug, and it may look enticing to some people, but again, if you can't validate where the pedigree of the drug is from, where it was manufactured, it is a big risk. Now, for smaller institutions, previously, that don't have a drug information service or a large, team to manage drug shortages. In the past, I was also part of a I was probably one of the few who helped manage drug shortages at another institution, and it was myself and the operations manager, or then later on we had some more people who were in operations to help. So really just getting the team within your pharmacy who knows where drug is coming from, identifying one, sometimes we say like as a responsible person, but more identifying a person who can help keep everything in line of what is going on to help manage the shortage. You don't need to have, you don't have the means to have a drug information service or, have a group for, just only taking the day-to-day case of drug shortages, which unfortunately now that has been the case for many of us. It's just really working with your pharmacy group, working with your P&T leadership, your leadership at the institution, identifying great stakeholders within certain patient care areas, like if you have a doctor, someone similar to Dr. Botz who's an advocate for patient safety, work with them to say, when you are in the struggle of a drug shortage and identifying those alternatives, are they safe, are they appropriate, are there anything along our systems that we need to improve to make sure that we deliver this alternative in a safe and appropriate way.
Great, thank you. And I think it's just incumbent upon me to address some of the all-cause threats and harm and risk that Dr. Botz and I and Chief Adcox at MD Anderson are addressing in an all-cause threat approach to institutions. The other pressure, Adriana, as you know, is the financial pressure on the pharmacist, is cut 10% out of your budget, and that leaves them with the temptation of, okay, I have a drug shortage, I've got a wholesaler that'll give me this, I can buy it easily, it may not be the most trustworthy source, but I've got to get 10% out of the budget and I don't have the medications. And I guess my recommendation there is you've got to bite the bullet and go back to the boss, because the risk of these gray market drugs, Sarah, one of the problems was that some of the most expensive drugs are the chemo drugs, and they are getting diluted and watered down so that these wholesalers can sell them. And there's just no way to assure that you have full potency of these drugs. And unfortunately, the underside of our healthcare system is this awful issue of fraud. So, which we're finding out is enormous. It's an enormous problem. Professional malfeasance at the administrative level is putting pressure on good caregivers and good pharmacists to do things they wouldn't never do for their own family, but just have to do. So going back to you, Sarah, do you believe that there may be an opportunity for getting moms and parents and families to rally together to perhaps put some pressure on the payers? We can all talk about all the greatest things we can do, but it really is the insurers that can actually either inject funding or certain sanctions and other things that they can do to pressure the suppliers to provide more of their product. Do you think there's an opportunity to rally parents around this issue? And I'll go to Grace after that to see perhaps there's some way that ASHP or others, rallying together with consumers could do something to keep attention on this. I hate to think that this is the one webinar, Grace, that's my promise back to you, and then that's it. So, Sarah, thoughts about rallying moms and parents and dads together?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that really when you also put a face to what's happening, it's real people, it's real children involved, or patients that are, really in critical need of these medications. I know from my experience when I went out and kind of sent out that call for help, so many people were just shocked that even occurred. They said, well, they run out of chemo medication? That can happen. United States of America, people were shocked, as I was. And I think that a lot of people don't even know that occurs unless you're personally affected. So I think it is very important to get this message out there. There's also thousands of children and other patients who don't have a network that can help them and bring attention to the cause, and maybe just get switched to another protocol. And unfortunately, they don't have a good outcome, or they don't make it because now they haven't had these critical medications that they needed that they would have had they had. They would have had an amazing, outcome had they been able to have the medications they need. So I think that there's a lack of awareness that in the general population that this occurs, and I think that kind of holding those drug makers accountable and insurers will make a big difference, and I think that we can affect change absolutely in that way. And I'm happy to be a part of leading that effort going forward.
Well, thank you for, we're all so private now, and I think a lot of us just don't even want to be public about anything just because of what a nasty environment the internet is. And thank you for your courage of sharing Brooke's story with others, because these stories are so powerful and can have impact, and it really exposes all of us when we have to do that. But thank you so much for that. Grace, thoughts on what could be done more than just a webinar? We fulfilled our promise. I don't think it's enough. Now, what can be done, or what might be out there where we can all work together?
Well, yes, thank you for the webinar. I think that's a great step forward. I know that the American Society of Health System Pharmacists, ASHP, has been doing a lot of work on Capitol Hill and with the FDA and White House to try to bring some awareness, as well as bring some awareness to not only Congress, but to other policymakers to try to effect some change. They have actually put together a template letter to congressmen that ASHP members and the public can use to write their own letters. I think so there's that work that's going on currently. They also have a drug shortage resource page where they do have some clinical resources and guidances on how to navigate during these kinds of situations. Of course, it's not. It's a very robust resource, but it doesn't fit. I mean, there's a lot of nuances and a lot of exceptions across the nation as far as practice goes. So they try to address the higher level things. I think what you said about having patients partner with us to have their stories heard is going to be the most impactful. Once there's a face to the name, to the story, it just becomes that much more personal and powerful. And even if this is one webinar that starts, it's kind of like the ripples in a pond from a stone thrown, and it just keeps growing so long as that momentum continues to have advocacy and energy behind it. So thank you to Sarah for being courageous for that, because pressure against payers, pressure against Congress people is going to be most helpful. I know Senator Feinstein in California has just recently sent out a survey to a lot of the practitioners to see, to get a sense of what the drug shortages are, what kind of impacts they're having on the organizations. And I'm very hopeful that kind of awareness will also help to again, effect change.
Well, thank you. I really think your comment about the stories are really, really powerful. I can't tell you the feeling of desperation, Sarah, that I felt that Grace was my 20th or 25th phone call. And I thought, oh my gosh, and I had the same feeling. How in America, in one of the wealthiest areas of actually our country, that we can't, that I was, until I found Grace, Sarah, I was dreading calling you back, because I tried every angle I could. And Grace, thank you. We're so grateful for you. And I don't think people understand the kind of desperation that you go through. And as a former cancer doctor, I knew how important that dose was. And Greg, you were one of the folks I called, and you opened my eyes, Greg, to the shortage. So we'll go to Greg, Adriana for final comments, and then Arlene, we're going to give you the last word, and you've always been such a champion. I know you have great things to say. So back to Greg, Adriana, and then Arlene.
Well, thanks. I think what I would offer, in addition to what we've heard already about advocacy and partnering with families to create the stories that can lead to change, I think one of the things that we can do as practitioners, as patient safety practitioners, is document the things that we are doing, that we are operationalizing, the best practices that have worked in our institutions, and share them with other organizations so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can take the best of what the large organizations have done, and they may not have the resources to do it completely, but they've got the roadmap that was used the best practices that were used to try to get their handle on managing drug shortages in their world, and have real solutions, operational guidelines. Give them the information about how you did what you did to move the effort farther down the field without having to reinvent the wheel themselves. That's such an important strategy that I hope this webinar and others will help our collective communities learn about.
Thanks, Greg. Adriana?
No, I mean, I'm thankful that you have this webinar to kind of show the struggle of drug shortages, not only just from, to show that it can impact small community hospitals, but as well as large system institutions like ourselves at MD Anderson. In the height of the opioid shortage, we were hearing from other large cancer centers on what we're doing, what is going on, how are we managing things for our patients who are in pain. And, even though a few years ago we did have a more shortages to deal with, I think these now just touched globally every aspect of our, of our patients. So bringing more national attention to this, that this does exist, that we struggle daily to make sure that we have the best things for our patient is really what's needed. We need to bring more, advocacy towards that these things do exist, and if they do have an opportunity to reach out to your congressman or a policymaker to make them aware that this is a situation and how we're struggling, that every hospital is struggling right now to make sure that we deliver high quality care.
Well, thank you, Adriana. And you may wonder why I bypassed Arlene to comment, and I'm giving her a longer last word. And I just want to share with you, we talked about Grace being a hero and Sarah being a hero, and I think all of the great work you're doing. In future, we'll be talking about some of these things, but Arlene Salamandra is one of my heroes because in the last 2 to 3 weeks, she championed with me to help rescue a patient that was actually the subject of professional malfeasance and the kind of things that are going on in our healthcare institutions that are kind of behind the scenes, that are motivated by finances and other things. And I have to tell you, Arlene, you have the last word, but you are really a quiet champion. Arlene actually spoke truth to power in her own environment when she was a healthcare worker. She has championed patient safety, and although we can't get into the details of her heroic efforts, Arlene, you really are a hero, and thank you for what you've done in the last couple of weeks to rescue another patient advocate in a hospital in another state. Arlene, you are really a star, and so thank you. And we not only honor you to close as a patient advocate, but also as a great champion behind the scenes.
Well, thank you, Chuck, for those kind words. I really appreciate it. And I'm happy to help people because I've been there. So I think I know exactly how patients feel when they do become a victim of a medical error. So I was happy to help out. And today, as a patient, I didn't realize the problem of drug shortages. I think until it happens to you, you really don't know what goes on. And so I was happy that the webinar today kind of focused on this, and I hope to have to hear more webinars to come. So the information that Adriana and Dr. Botz presented was so informative, especially all the processes that are in place to combat the drug shortages. And it's good to hear all the precautions that are being taken too. And thank you, Sarah. I know how difficult it is to share your story, and thank you for your courage and becoming an advocate for all of us. So welcome to the club. Sorry, my dog is barking. And just keep in mind that stories are powerful. So I'm happy that you will be sharing your story. And I believe that you met Grace for a reason. So I'm glad that Brooke is doing well, and we'll all pray for her recovery. So thank you to all the presenters today. And everybody have a good rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arlene. So God bless all of you. We'll have another webinar next month, and I'd like to keep the speakers on just for a moment. We always do a process improvement loop to see what we could do better, but this one is hard to beat. You've done a fabulous job. So thank you, and we'll all stay in the line, and God bless all of you, and we'll see you back in June.